All right, so then he gets into this really cool section where it's very much different from everything he's played so far. So far, he's built up a really nice solo with great tone, great phrasing, but the phrasing has been very like vocalist. You know, there's a lot of breaks in it, and it's like 2 or 3 notes, and he's working off those notes, and then he gets into this section where this is kind of what stood out to me at first. Like most of the things that I kind of am attracted to, I've talked to this before. I'll hear some really cool stuff, but then there's 1 or 2 lines that are just like, oh my god, what was that? And it goes by so quick that I just want to figure out what it is. So, and if you guys are anything like me, you kind of will hear the same thing. When you hear this solo, if you haven't heard it already, you'll hear that one line and go, oh my god, what was that? So it sounds chromatic-y, but it's really not. It's, I mean, it has a little bit of chromatic movement in there, but it's still just based out of your pentatonic scale, throwing in the flat 5 note, also throwing in that 6th note that we just discussed. So it has the flat 5, the 6th, and then it also throws the 9th in there. So it has all those notes in there, but essentially it's right out of the pentatonic scale. Of course, throwing those notes in there. So it's not really just random chromatic notes. But let's break this down, and then maybe we'll talk a little about it. It's basically walking down the 15th fret of the E string to the 17th 15 on the B string to the 17th fret on the G string. So that, if you want to break this down into little sections, that's like section 1 of this 16th note phrase. Which really is which is basically that. So really he's throwing in a minor 6th in there too. And this is where he goes. Now he shifts the pattern down to the 14th fret of the E string. Then he plays the 15 and 14 on the B string to the 16th fret of the G string. So again, the phrase is very much the same. You got 1 note on the 1st string, then 2 notes, then 1 note. Then the next phrase is, and if you wanted to walk down, now that's one way of taking, we'll get back into this phrase, this is a little sidetrack, but that's one way of taking, this phrase starts out cool because then it gets into that little pivoting note thing. But if you wanted, you could take just that part of the phrase and work that into your solo. So you know, you just start figuring out it's a 4-note pattern, 1 note on the high string, 1 note on the low string, and then 2 notes on the string between. So if you have your A minor pentatonic, you can do, right? It's the same little pattern. But anyway, sorry about the sidetrack. So and this is where it sounds very chromatic-y, but again, it's just, those notes are just your pentatonic scale with the flat 5 in between. So after you do, it goes from the 15th fret of the B string, goes down to the 16th fret of the G string, to the 14th fret of the B string, to the 15th fret of the G string, to the 14th fret of the G string. So it's really just this shape. Move down a half step. But he's playing it with different fingers. So that whole thing is. And then you go down to the 16th fret of the D string. Now, again, I think he uses the pick for that whole thing. And I do chicken picking, so I use my middle finger. And I actually pull off notes. So I pick the first note with the middle finger. Then I pick the second note with my pick. And I pull that off. And then I pick that third note with a pick. So, and I do the same thing on the second phrase. And then here I'm pivoting between the pick and the middle finger. Then I pull off, and then I pick that last note. Now the reason why I do that, and the reason why I went through all that, is that definitely gets a different tonality when you start getting those pick notes. All those, if you pick every note, you hear that pick. If you pluck one, it gets a thicker tone. Then if you pull off in the next note, it gets a different tone than the pluck or the picking every note. And then you have a solid pick note. And for me, my ear likes that kind of phrasing. It's a little, I don't know, like saxophone-ish or whatever, where you get kind of breaths of notes. And then different slurs. Anyway, so after that whole phrase, now he slides up from that 16th fret of the D string to the 17th fret of the D string, and he just goes up basically a G major arpeggio. So he plays the 17th fret of the D string to the 16th fret of the G string, and then he bars and rolls over the 15th fret on both the B and the E string. And this is the one part where he does do some chromatic movement. But really, it's just your fourth, your major third, and minor third. So it's 17, 16, 15 on the E string. And that's a staccato phrase. It's not... It's... And now, before he goes down to that 14th fret, so it's a 4-note phrase. But before he goes to that 14th fret on the E string, I think he hits the 15th fret of the B string. And I could be wrong, but... And I like the way that phrase goes. Instead of... I like... So the whole thing is... So when he gets down to that 14th fret, he goes from the 14th fret on the E string to the 15, 14 on the B string to the 16th fret on the G string. So now then he walks down the 15, 14 on the B string, 16, 14 on the G string to the 17 on the D string. So and then he pivots back up to that 14th fret on the G string. Then he plays the 16, 17, 16, 14 on the D string. So then he goes down to that 16th fret of the A string, goes back up to the 14th fret of the D string, back to the 16th fret of the A string, to the 14th fret of the G string, and he slides down to the 12th fret. So that whole thing is... resolves on that E note on the 14th fret of the D string. So a little faster. It's now then he goes and before we go into the next section, if you want to break that into pieces so that it feels a little more comfortable to learn. Again, that first section is, then the next one is, then the next one is, The next one is that arpeggio going up. Then the whole. I know I went through that quickly. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's how I visualized it. Like, I can't learn these things, and in fact, it's really hard for me to break this down slow. That's why I'm always kind of stumbling on things, because it's not easy to play slow. It's not easy to play fast, but it's almost harder to play slow. But the way I learn these things are in sections like that. Like, I'll learn 3 or 4 notes, and then so I'll learn these first 4 notes, then I'll learn these, then I'll put those 2 together, and I'll just practice that. And then I'll go to the next section, and then I'll play all that together. So then after I learn those 3 parts, instead of moving on, I'll just practice those. And then maybe I'll try and even incorporate it into something that I'm familiar with, like this E minor pentatonic position, right? So I'll go. So, and none of that was great, but you get the idea. So now I'm actually not just learning a whole lick that's really long. I'm learning the pieces of it so that I might be able to incorporate that into my own playing at some point. So anyway, so then after that whole thing, he goes. And that's just a typical blues phrase from your E note on the E string, 12th fret. Then he walks down the 15th to 12th fret on the B string. And then he slides up from the 14, 15 back to the 14 on the G string. And he plays the 12th fret on the G string. And he goes down, resolves down to that E note on the D string, 14th fret, and he rolls back over on the 14th fret of the G string. Then he goes from the 12th fret on the B string and G string, bends that up a little bit, and he resolves to the E note on the 12th fret, on the 14th fret, I'm sorry, of the D string. So that whole phrase is